disturb us. And we're also going to be taking questions through 3 different ways. The first way is poll everywhere. You can text IST startup and then space and then your question to 22333. And then if you ask the questions on there, we'll bring them up. So that's more anonymous. Twitter, you can use the hashtag IST startup. And we'll also have just old-fashioned hand raising. If you raise your hand, I'll point to you, and then you have to push the black button that's by your computer, and that'll move the camera so that she can see you, and also she'll be able to hear you. So you are also welcome to take photos, and you can share them in our Flickr and on Instagram using hashtag IST startup as well. You also might be photographed or filmed when you're participating in this session, so if you're uncomfortable with that, if you're uncomfortable with being photographed, you might want to move to the back of the room, and then I can take your name and user ID, and I'll send it to make sure you're not, put somewhere in public. So now to introduce our speaker. Lynn Perkins is CEO and co-founder of UrbanSitter, a venture-backed mobile and online service that connects parents and babysitters through social connections. Launched in 2011, Lynn led the company from notion to national marketplace in less than a year. An internet startup veteran, UrbanSitter is Lynn's 3rd startup experience. Previously, she served as founder and CEO of Zuni.com and VP of Business Development at BridgePath.com. So, give it up to Lynn.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be presenting today. I wanted to try to tie my presentation into your class topic as well. So I thought I would talk a lot about building an internet business, specifically a marketplace, but I'm also going to deviate from my presentation a few times to talk about how we use data. And then at the end, our VP of Engineering, Chris Baumgartner, is going to join me. And he will tell you more about the database that we use, and I'm happy to answer any questions that are more specific to what you're studying in your class. And he's definitely much more technical than I am, so save the tough technical questions for him. Just, if you can hear me, just go ahead and nod. I want to make sure it sounds okay. Great, thanks. Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and do a bit of my presentation, and then after the section about data, I'll take a pause and we can answer some questions, and then I'll go back to it. Great, so just to kind of give you an overview of UrbanSitter, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what we do. So our mission is to connect parents with childcare providers, and the way we do this in an efficient method is we really use social recommendations and personal information that's relevant to you as a parent or a sitter, and then we use online transactions. So I try to kind of sum it up as we're kind of like OpenTable meets Facebook in some ways. And I'll go through the product and tell you a little bit more about it, and when I can, I'll also tell you how data is really important for what we do. Okay, so to start with, why did I decide to tackle this space? Well, I'm really excited about marketplace businesses in general, and I felt like babysitting was one that was highly inefficient for both sides. So as a parent of 3 kids, I definitely feel the pain on the demand side. I feel like it's hard to find real-time information about sitters. I might find a great sitter, but there's no guarantee that he or she is going to be available when I need them. I was finding that sitters that were being recommended didn't have a lot of reviews or other information about them. And really, there's just a lot of limited information. Reverse back about 15 years when I was in college, I was an active babysitter, and I felt like the babysitting market was also very inefficient being a sitter. As somebody who had moved to a new city for college, it was tough for me to meet families that might be looking for a babysitter. Even once I found a few of those families, there was no guarantee that when I wanted to work would match up with when they actually needed me. And finally, I felt like it was really tough to meet additional families if I wanted more work. So when I looked at starting UrbanSitter, I wanted to make sure that I was solving the problem for both sides of the marketplace. And that's been really crucial for us because it's helped us really build up a talented supply side, because there is a need for sitters to find more work. And so that's really helped the marketplace grow. So what's our solution? So UrbanSitter is different than a lot of the solutions that are out there because we really leverage, we try to make it as engaging as possible, and we really leverage trust as a main component. So we use the social graph as our kind of our core to this. When we started off, we required people to log in using Facebook. And this was a big decision on our part because as a new business, you really want to get out there and get as many customers as you can. And we knew that by putting up that wall of having to use Facebook, that we may actually lose people. But we had a true belief that being able to see which sitters that your friends have used or which sitters are friends with your favorite sitters would really make this product different. So that's where the trust component comes in. On the efficiency side, I really wanted to create something that had the booking capabilities of something like OpenTable. So rather than reaching out to 10 sitters and hoping that one of them could work for me, actually being able to see which sitters are available at the date and time that I'm looking for them. And then probably most relevant to the class that you're in, we're very metrics driven. And I'll talk about how we use data both to surface information to parents, but also how it helps us make key decisions in our day-to-day process. So as I mentioned, the very first thing we did was we required Facebook Connect for both parents and sitters to log in. But in addition to that, we didn't stop there. We really believe that the social graph for parents expands beyond their immediate friends, and they look to other things that are trusted sources for them. So for parents, this might be other parents from my kid's school. I might want to see that other families from my kid's elementary school have booked a sitter. Or it could be that it's the soccer team that they play on. Or maybe it's the mom's group that I belong to in my neighborhood. On the flip side, with the sitters, it would be things like, where do you go to school? Are you in a sorority or a fraternity or a club or something that would connect you with other people that might be care providers on our site? So now we have over 12,000 affiliations in our system that are beyond the individual connections between friends. And these really do range from anything from your child's elementary school all the way to it might be like a swim and tennis club that you belong to, or a special language school that your kids go to. So this really plays into the data component because you can imagine that we want to very quickly surface results for parents, but when you have these 10,000 different affiliations, it can really weigh down the network and how quickly you're able to surface results. So a little bit later, I'll talk more about how we've built out this social graph component technically and tell you a little bit more about how that plays into the results that parents see. So we try to surface the most qualified sitters for the job for each family. And this really varies from family to family. Our algorithm looks at 40 different characteristics, and each one is weighted slightly differently depending on who you are and when you're looking for a sitter on our platform. So a family searched by a date and time to see these sitter results. And they're going to see different results than I am because we're connected to different sitters. But I'll show you a little bit about what they're seeing here on this screen. So as you can see, the top sitter, Kate, has 11 reviews. And I'm connected to her because a mom from my mother's group, 2 parents from my kids' swim school, and 2 parents from the California Academy of Sciences have also booked this sitter. So that's how our connections sit with the top sitter. I can see on here that she responds in 1 hour. One of the advantages of us being transaction-based is that we know how quickly these sitters respond. So if I'm looking for somebody last minute, I'm more likely to take the sitter that responds quickly. Another way that, because we're transaction-based, we can surface a lot of data about these sitters. I can see that not only does she have 11 reviews, but she actually has 5 repeat families. And parents tell us over and over again that this is one of the key things that we show them because, while reviews may feel very subjective, having a sitter go back to a family's home multiple times feels more objective, like the parent trusted them enough to have them come back again. And this has become really important in terms of the algorithm. So we know that new parents are looking for sitters who have repeat families. So we're more likely to show them sitters that have worked for the same families over and over again. If you go down a notch, you'll see the next sitter, Ziva. And below Ziva's name, I don't know how well you can see it from where you're sitting, but you'll see all these little pictures. And those are all people that I know that have either booked Ziva, or they might be a sitter that I've used before. They might be friends with Ziva. So this shows me that, hey, great, my friend Andrew, who's the first picture on there, he has 4 kids, and I know that they're young, just like mine. And so if she was a good sitter for his family, I would put more weight in her being a good sitter for my family as well. She responds in 4 hours. So I probably wouldn't go to her if I was looking for somebody last minute, but I can see that she has 101 reviews. So she's definitely one of the more active sitters on the site. And then we highlight valuable details about the sitter's performance. So I talked a little bit about response time, but we also show things like, are they CPR trained? What payment methods do they accept? Today we now require sitters to accept payment via credit card from parents. And we use a company called Braintree to facilitate this so that it actually gets pushed directly into the sitter's checking account, or if they want to take the money via Venmo, they can do that as well. We also have added video, which is really interesting. The parents can see that the sitters put together a 1-minute video, and they can see her in her dorm room. In this case, this is a sitter in Boston, and she actually plays the ukulele and sings a little song about what a great sitter she is. And like 30 seconds into the video, all the parents are ready to book her. But what we've tried to do with UrbanSitter is to surface as much information about the sitter's performance, about their track record on our site, and to show you as much information about them as possible so that parents can make a good decision. On the flip side of this, if I'm a sitter and I'm getting a booking request, I'll see almost the same type of information. So in my case, they'll see that I have 3 boys. They'll be able to see that they've actually babysat for one of my friends before. So they'll say, okay, great, that family, that mom didn't seem too crazy. Hopefully Lynn's not crazy too. And they get to see some of the same stats. Like, for instance, they can tell that sitters have come back to my home multiple times, which gives them an indication that babysitting in my home probably feels fairly safe. So we try to show this information on both sides, to the sitters and to the parents, so that both sides can decide that it's the right decision for them. And then probably the biggest piece of our business that keeps parents and sitters coming back and back again is that we take the stress out of the logistics. So as a sitter, one of my biggest complaints when I was a babysitter is that I would constantly have to return phone calls or text back to parents that wanted to book me. And it was always a hassle if I was in the middle of class and I was like, shoot, no, I'm not available on Saturday. I really wish they wanted to book me on Sunday. So as a sitter, I love UrbanSitter because I'm able to actually put in my real calendar, and I'm able to only get job requests for the times that I want to work. On the parent side, it's really nice to only reach out to sitters that have said that they're available. And the payment piece, that they better tip would cash, and the night to pay. Key things in growing our business. So we have about 80% fill rate for the jobs that people are looking for. So for Marketplace, this is really high. Just to give you a comparison, Airbnb or TaskRabbit are probably more in like the 50 to 60% range. And part of that is that our niche is pretty narrow. So if you're a sitter and you've said that you're willing to work in a certain neighborhood and at a certain time, you're pretty likely to take the job. We have a high repeat use rate. About 70% of the people who use our service use it again. It may actually be quite even higher than that. We find a lot of people find their nannies on our site, and once they find the nanny, they don't keep it online, although we're building some new tools to make it more enticing to do that. 75% of the sitters respond in under 23 minutes. In our biggest markets like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago, the average response time is more like 90 seconds. So it's pretty great as a parent when I go to book a sitter to see the response right away. I can take that off my to-do list and know that somebody that I trust is coming to watch my kids. We're available right now we're actually available in 60 cities across the country, but we really focus our marketing dollars in 12 different markets. And I can talk a little bit more about how we decided to sort of strategically place our money. Getting the marketplace off the ground. I'm going to talk a little bit about KPIs in a second, and then I'm going to deviate and talk a little bit more about the business intelligence tool that we use to look at data, because I think it's probably more relevant to what you're studying in your class. But I'll first talk about kind of how we got it off the ground. So I think when you're building a marketplace, or really any business for that matter, really identifying the primary problem that you're solving and keeping that focus is incredibly important. So with UrbanSitter, we had to say, okay, what's the biggest pain point? And we recognized that the absolute biggest pain point was helping parents find trusted sitters and helping sitters find good families. We definitely knew that the booking component was important, and paying them, all of that was really key too. But really the biggest pain point was helping parents and sitters find each other. Is the pain point a push or a pull? For us, it's nice because parents are actively looking for solutions to find babysitters, and so we're actually able to. We don't have to tell parents what it is we do. They pretty much understand right away, and we actually find quite a few people searching for babysitters on the internet that find us. So we're really lucky in the sense that we weren't trying to retrain parents on something that they didn't already know that they needed. They knew they needed babysitters. We're just trying to make it more efficient for them in terms of how they do it. And one of the things I liked about this business is that there actually are pain points on both sides of the marketplace. So it's hard for parents to find trusted childcare, and as I mentioned earlier, it's also hard for sitters to find new families. So I really believe that when you're building a product roadmap for whatever you're building, that you really want to address the primary pain points first. It's really hard when you have limited resources. There's so many things you want to do at a startup, and you really have to narrow in and say, like, okay, what are my primary things I'm going to focus on, and from there, you can actually, once you've got the primary things done, you can expand your roadmap to include other things as well. But I think really focusing on what you want to address immediately, and with that, you'll get a lot of input from customers that are your early adapters, and they'll maybe even help you move the direction of what you're trying to do. So for building the initial user base, I think whether you're doing a business-to-business business or business-to-consumer, any kind of business you're creating, you obviously have to figure out how to get those customers. And in a marketplace, it's even more tricky because you have to have both sides in the marketplace to get it going. You can't just have wonderful parents and no sitters, and you can't just have a great pool of sitters but nobody who wants to book them. So for us, it was really building up in each market. We rolled out market by market, and for us, it was figuring out where can we find the best sitters. And what we would do is we would go to a market and say, okay, where do most of the families live? And then we would really hone in on which universities were near there. So we would go and find people who were already looking for babysitting jobs. So whether it would be like at your college or a college in the market we were focused on. And then also figuring out, how did babysitters get their jobs at that point in time? Were they currently getting them through some sort of a school job board, Craigslist, LinkedIn? Like, what were they using? Because that was a great source for us to tap in and find more people on the supply side. And then on the parent side, it was looking at where parents were currently finding their sitters. And for the most part, this was through online parent forums or neighborhood community groups. And so we knew that that would be a great way for us to tap in and kind of market our business, would be through those forums. And what we found on both sides is that, and I think this is true with any type of business that you build, that you're always going to have the influencers, the early adapters that find you and they want to tell all their friends about you. And really honing in on those people and incentivizing them to promote your business can be really impactful. So for marketplaces, there's always this sort of where to start. Do you go national or do you focus on something that's more local? In our case, it made the most sense to start with something local because it's really important for us to have connected parents on the site, because that actually increases the word of mouth spread of our business. And by doing that, it helps reduce our cost of marketing. And so for us, it made a lot of sense to go hyper local. On the flip side, there are a lot of marketplaces that have started national, but they've really focused more in on specializations. An example of that would be a business called Just Answer. It's a site that you can go to and you can ask any question. It might be you're having a legal question with your landlord, or it's the middle of the night and you want to know if the symptom that your child has requires them to go to the doctor. So in the case of somebody like Just Answer, they could go nationwide but really focus in on certain types of questions and types of skills initially. The same thing could be said of a virtual business like Odesk. On the flip side, with UrbanSitter, location really was important, and I think there are a lot of other marketplaces that have this as well, where it was really, the best use of our marketing budget to focus in on one or two markets initially. So I want to talk a little bit about KPIs, key performance indicators, and this starts to tie in more to the data. I think one of the most important things to do when you're building a business is to very early on figure out how you're going to look at data and to start tracking things and look for trends and use data to help you make business decisions. I'm also a firm believer that you can have analysis paralysis, where you spend too much time in the data and not enough time actually moving the needle on your product or talking to customers. But for the most overall, I'm a big believer in using data to help make your decisions. So I think one thing is similar to picking a focus for your product is really picking a primary KPI. So what is going to be the thing that your company, everyone in the company, if I walked around the room would say, yes, this is the key thing we're tracking to. And in our business, this has actually changed over time, depending on where we are in our life cycle. But right now, we're really focused on first-time completed booking parents. Because we have a high repeat use rate, and because a lot of the other things in our funnel are working, for us right now, it's really all about driving new customers into the platform and then converting them to being booking parents. So if I would hope that if you walked around UrbanSitter right now, that people would all tell you like, oh yeah, we're tracking first-time completed booking parents. And hopefully they would know that for many reasons. One of them being that it's posted, a huge sign showing our progress every month is posted right by our refrigerator. I figure you can't miss it that way. But I think it's important that everyone in the company knows what this primary number is that you're looking at and the reason why you're looking at it. So in our case, it's because a lot of our product work right now is focused on getting new users to convert. And so everything we do kind of ties into this. So I think, sharing it with your team every week, making sure that you're tracking progress on it. There's so many things you can look at, and we actually do look at a lot of stats, which I'll show you. But always having one stat that the whole company knows is kind of like the ultimate stat that you're aiming for right now. So I thought I would kind of veer away from the presentation for a bit and talk about how we look at data and different, just show you a few examples. So, I would say like at the very top of the funnel, using Google Analytics to show, this is showing sitter conversion rate by device type. So this is saying, looking at desktop versus mobile versus tablet, like how are people converting when they come? And this is really important because we may have on mobile, for instance, we might be lagging behind in certain product features than we are from desktop. And we may look at this and see, we can cut the data different ways, but looking at trends to see like, oh wow, did we see a boost specifically on mobile because we were running some kind of a marketing campaign, or do we actually think that something we did in the product is moving the needle? But we do use Google Analytics to really look at that type of conversion. So then the next few reports I'm going to show you are, they all say Looker on them. Looker is a tool that we've implemented. Looker is the name of the company, but it's essentially a business intelligence tool that allows our team to pull all sorts of stats from the database without us needing any development resources to do that. Every once in a while, we still need dev resources to do other components of it, but for the most part, we wanted people in the company to be able to access data without having to dig too deep. So this is kind of our monthly KPI dashboard. And it lets us review a lot of the top of the funnel metrics that I mentioned earlier. And it also lets us see trends over time. So everything from parent signups to, for instance, like you'll see on the top right, you'll see our sitter signups at one point dipped. I don't think this data is actually real, but we at one point stopped spending money on acquiring sitters. And so our data obviously would reflect that. Then we have monthly new booking parents, which I mentioned is one of our key stats right now. Completed new booking parents and completed jobs. So all of this data is coming to us straight from the database, but everyone in the company has different dashboards that they use depending on their job. So this is a case of us using the data, looking at specifically a big change we made in the product. So as I mentioned earlier, we initially started off that you could only use Facebook to sign in. And then we decided that as we grew that we wanted to be able to allow you to come in via other ways as well. So one of those was LinkedIn, and the other one was that you could register via email. And after you registered, we were going to use all of our methods to try to get you to upgrade because those connections are so important. But this is a new dashboard that we rolled out after we'd made that change so that we could track and see where the signups were coming from. The majority were still coming from LinkedIn versus, Facebook versus LinkedIn. But over time, we can track and see which method are people using to sign up. This is another example of like a specific point in time. This is one that our product team uses. This is looking at changes to the sign-up flow. We made some changes, very like lightweight changes to the sign-up page, and we wanted to go in and look at the numbers and see like, hey, did that have any impact on our business? So we can actually go in and use this data to see if it had an impact on over whether it's a week that you're looking at or a month. But it's key whenever we do any big product changes that we track to see did that product change, was it beneficial? And also looking at other elements, like did it make something else more complicated and it's actually working against us? But we look at that really closely. And then I thought I would share this one. This is looking at sitter cancellations. So another way that we use data is we use data to inform the priorities of our customer support team. So we have a team of 6 people here that reach out to parents and sitters for various reasons. Some of it's proactive, but some of it is also when something doesn't go right. So this report that they use in our Looker tool is actually looking at sitter cancellations so that they can actually provide proactive outreach to parents if and when a sitter has to cancel on them. It happens very rarely. Only 3% of jobs end up getting canceled by sitters. Actually, a lot more end up getting canceled by parents. But in this case, a parent, if they're planning on a sitter coming to their house, it's really important that we reach out to them and try to help them find another sitter to fill that job. So that was kind of my deviation away from what I wanted to cover, but I thought that might be relevant as you look at how people are using information from databases to make both short-term and long-term decisions about the business. Marketing strategy, I think when you're starting a company, there's so much that you want to do, and you can imagine a lot of ways to acquire customers, and I think being very specific and focused on how you spend that money is incredibly important. So being very specific about who you're targeting to start with. So in our case, maybe we would go to a market like Chicago and say, okay, we're going to launch in Chicago. Well, for us, it's actually more beneficial to pick some subset of that market. So we might say, okay, we're going to focus on Wicker Park and Lincoln Park because we know those are big family areas. And therefore, we're going to mostly focus both our online spend and our offline spend in those areas. And then we systematically start testing different channels. So for instance, in our business, what we found is that once we've been in a market for a little while, we start to gain brand recognition, and that makes it a lot easier for us to move to online marketing. We're actually better off starting with offline marketing to kind of get the word of mouth out there with parents, and then we can start funneling more money into those online channels. I think one thing that, investors will say, oh, are you seeing, tell me which marketing channel is moving up and to the right. So which one is your successful marketing channel? Well, I think what we've learned and what I've heard from other CEOs is that a lot of times marketing channels go in fits and starts. So you might be acquiring users on Facebook and you're doing really well, but then you sort of tap out on that market, or they change something about their way they're doing marketing and it becomes more expensive. What we found is that you really have to reiterate your plan and modify as you see these channels either becoming scalable or shutting down depending on what you're willing to spend to acquire customers. We are firm believers in doubling down when something's working, because you do want to test it and see, can I scale this? Is this a channel where I'm going to double my money in this channel and still get customers at that same cost? Or is it something that's actually going to have a ceiling on it? We've also abandoned things and come back to them later. So for us, we don't do very well with retargeting, or we didn't used to do very well with retargeting ads. And now 2 years later into our business, we've started to revisit them and it seems to work. So part of it is based on the stage of your company too. And, one of my biggest words of advice if you are thinking of starting a marketplace business is figure out ways to turn your supply and demand side into your marketing armies. So whether it's a bonus program for parents where every time they bring you a new family to use your product, you give them babysitting dollars, or whether it's on the sitter side where every time a sitter books a new parent through the platform and they're the ones that brought them on, that you actually give them a bonus or a reward. But I think using your advocates as your marketing army is really beneficial. This next bullet point I actually had in here before I knew I was even speaking to a class on data. But it's really hard when you're the small company in a big field to get PR. And what we found is that because we're transaction-based and because we have a massive database where we're looking at whether it's trends or just raw data where I can actually pull and say, hey, I actually know what the average across Pennsylvania, I know that a sitter for one child on average makes this amount of money. Really finding ways to use your data to make you an expert. It's a great way for companies that are small to actually gain PR exposure where maybe you wouldn't otherwise get it. So in our case, I'll give you an example. In our case, there are 2 companies that are big online babysitting sites. And in both cases, they're much more like Craigslist, where I post a job and then hundreds of you respond and I select one of you, but the transaction is not done on the platform.
Well, in our case, all the transactions stay on the platform. So not only do we know that you've booked a sitter, but we actually know at what rate did you book them? How long were they on the job? We take all of that information and we turn it into an annual infographic that talks about sitter rates across the United States. It's probably one of our biggest PR movers every year. It gets picked up by everybody from the Today Show to the New York Times. And a lot of the other PR we work that we get, the coverage we get as well, comes from data that we're able to pull out of our system. So I can't emphasize enough that when you're a small company and you're trying to get PR, try to use anything you have to your advantage that your competitors might not have and turn that into your story. In our case, it is based on the data that we have in our system. Definitely your repeat users are your most valuable. You've already spent money to acquire them, so it's really important to keep them, and hopefully they become advocates for your business down the road. And we've really learned that your first experience at UrbanSitter matters. And so the same way that I showed you that report on sitter cancellations, our user operations team also really focuses on parents who are trying to book on the platform for the first time. Because we know that if you have a good first experience with us, you're likely to come back. So we really focus heavily on first-time users on our site and making sure that they have a good experience. We also recognize that when you're a parent and you have this aha moment, maybe you were supposed to go to work this morning and your nanny canceled on you, but you were able to find a sitter last minute on UrbanSitter. Those aha moments are ones where you're going to share with other people, and so it's in those moments where we encourage people to share about the product, because we know at that point you're more likely to share. Also, just making the service as seamless as possible. When we added payment to the platform, all of a sudden our user retention rate pretty much doubled. Once parents had paid their sitter through the app, they couldn't imagine going back to pulling out cash and paying them any other way. So things that we've done both in terms of our user operations, which is what we call customer support, and through the product have been really valuable in retaining customers. I think other examples would be open table points, or being able to split a ride with your friend on Uber, things like that are just make the experience so much easier, or they incentivize you to want to use the product again. I'll skip this one. Proactive customer support I kind of talked about when I shared the data, but I think really going above and beyond and offering good customer support when your business is small can go a long way. And then non-scalable activities. I think the best example I can give of non-scalable activities would be Airbnb. Initially, and even in some markets today, they still take professional photographs of the homes that they're going to be featuring. And as a result, when they rolled out and their site was new, the quality of the homes that they were showing on their platform just was so far superior to any of the other competitors for vacation rental homes. And this is a great example of doing something that maybe doesn't scale down the road with your business, but it sets you apart from the beginning. Uber, when Uber goes to a new market, let's say they're rolling out in San Diego for the first time, they will actually guarantee their drivers a daily minimum, and that keeps those drivers excited about being on Uber until the business growth can actually support those drivers using their regular payment method. So these non-scalable activities can really, they're not great for sustaining your business long term, but they can really help you get over that initial hurdle and get you to the point where you have more user growth happening. For us, it would be borrowing trust from other organizations. So if we were going to open up in Atlanta today, nobody in Atlanta would really know of UrbanSitter. And so the fastest way we can gain parents' trust is by partnering with parent groups in Atlanta that parents already know. So when we go into a new market, the first thing we do is form partnerships with some of the biggest parent groups that are out there. And you could use this same lesson and apply it to almost anything. So if you're going after business to business, you're doing a business to business product and you need to gain credibility of like the sales forces of the world. Partnering up with other enterprise companies that have already gained that type of credibility can really help your business. And then finally, this is very specific to marketplaces, but influencing what you can't control. I think this has been an interesting lesson for us. We can't necessarily influence the behavior of a sitter on UrbanSitter, but there are things that we can do to help to improve that behavior. So in our case, it's a 5-star sitter program where we tell sitters like, hey, parents love it when you take your shoes off when you get to their house. Or, wow, when sitters follow up with parents an hour after they've left the house to tell them that everything's okay, that really makes parents feel good. We can't be on the job with these sitters, but we can, through our product, we can actually provide hints and suggestions on what they can do that hopefully improves the experience for both the sitter and the parent. On the parent side, maybe parents don't know that, like, hey, sitters love it when you offer them an Uber home, or sitters really like it when you offer to pay for their dinner. So we put things in the product that hopefully help influence the behavior of both sides of our platform. I think my favorite of this that I think is very scalable is the way that Lyft they onboard their drivers. So before you can become a Lyft driver, you have to go drive 3 other Lyft drivers. So I, as a new Lyft driver, would be required to take 3 other Lyft drivers around before I can go pick up customers. And this is great because it allows those pre-existing Lyft drivers to give me tips like, oh, hey, by the way, I find that when I do this, my customers really like it. So it's a great way for Lyft to get their message and some of their key points out there without them having to train every single person. And then, just a little bit about expansion. I'll probably skip this because I want to make sure we have some time to talk about more about the database component. And also I want to open it up for questions. And then finally, evolving your product. So I'm a firm believer in using the feedback that you get from customers and your KPIs to help you drive your product. At UrbanSitter, we use a quarterly product prioritization process where we have a long list of things we want to do. It's always like 10 times longer than we actually have development bandwidth to do. But we actually sort of force rank them. Everyone on our team that votes in this gets a certain amount of money, and we vote on the different projects. And essentially, a project has to be fully funded, meaning I get $5, and those equate to a certain number of engineer hours. And each product that we vote on has to be fully funded before it becomes part of the next quarter product component. And we're also always looking at things. So, we're looking at, hey, are we doing anything next quarter to improve the experience for sitters? Are we doing anything to improve it for parents? Oh, by the way, like our primary KPI this year is new booking parents. Like, what are we doing to help new parents on the site? So we really focus on evolving our product based on decisions that are driving us to hit the KPI that we're tracking. We're taking in feedback from users, and we're also trying to make aesthetic updates so that it becomes a more pleasing experience. So that's kind of all I have on the presentation, and I'm sorry, I know I went really fast through it, but I wanted to leave time for other things. Before I opened it up for questions, I wanted to introduce you, let's get closer to me, Chris Bumgardner, who's our VP
Hello.
of Engineering. And I thought just for your class, it might be interesting for Chris to speak a little bit about the database that we use and why database is so important to a business like UrbanSitter that has so much information, and the social network component as well.
Hi, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so I'll give a real quick overview of our stack, our database specifically, and would love any questions you might have. Pardon me. So UrbanSitter started as a very traditional LAMP stack, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. We still run MySQL in production, and we have a replicated setup, and we're actually running the Percona distribution of MySQL. And we pretty much cache everything in memory within MySQL. We replicate it to another server, and the replica is what's actually used to drive Looker. So Looker, our BI tool that Lynn referenced, talks to the replica. This is an important thing, especially with marketplaces or heavily transactional systems. You want your analytics and heavy reports to be driven from the replica slave, not from your production database. Otherwise, if someone in marketing is running a KPI dashboard, it could slow down your actual website that your customers are using. And in terms of in our system, our stack is a handful of web servers behind a load balancer, and it's Apache. We're actually in the process of migrating Apache to Nginx, mostly for performance characteristics. If you're not familiar with that, the C10K problem is something to look into. It's pretty interesting. We use Memcache on each of our servers to do application level caching of our data. We are considering migrating that into Redis. Redis is obviously a much newer technology. It gives overall better performance and has more built-in support for things like cache regions and things like that. And when it comes to caching, I mean, I'm not sure if you've dealt with it before, but there's an old saying that there's two hard problems in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. Cache invalidation is a very hard problem, but it is definitely key to making things work smoothly. Speaking of caching, one of the other pieces of our data architecture is our in-memory graph database. And so this is a custom built Java solution that we run. And the problem that it solved is we do social connections as a big part of the way our system works. In other words, being able to say, these are the people you both know. So the people that you have in common with a sitter, let's say, from your social graph on Facebook and possibly LinkedIn. Searching and doing searches on the graph like that are very expensive when they're in your relational database, especially once you get a big enough set of data, enough users. So in a small data set, you can just do joins. You can effectively have a normalized table, like a tall, skinny table that's your users and who they're connected to, and then do joins on that to get that data. But then when you get to a certain size, graph searching doesn't work. Nowadays, there are more and more sort of NoSQL graph database solutions, some that are very generic. We built our own. It's very optimized for our problems, and it's a totally in-memory graph search. So all of the you both know type of graph searches are very fast, and we move those out of the database. Some of the other things we deal with on the data side are static assets. So this is another piece of data. How do you store your static assets? So that typically goes into usually two categories. One are the assets that your static assets for your website. So your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, your images, things like that. And then the other side are the user-generated content, the UGC, which, for example, user profile photos and videos and things like that. One of the improvements we're making is, again, this is all scalability driven, is moving all of that off of a custom server that was basically an asset server and that was mounted via NFS and shared across all of our web servers to using cloud storage buckets. So we're using Google Cloud's buckets on, Amazon has S3 buckets as well, which are nice because they kind of hide under the covers all that's needed to make that scale. So you can add unlimited number of assets to a particular bucket, for example. That also lets you improve caching and things like that. At a different level, it takes away from having to manage a server. Going along with that, we also are running Cloudflare. This is, again, a performance optimization. So if you're not familiar with Cloudflare, it lets you route your DNS through them, and then you can say which, for example, you can set different types of caching rules for different pages, your whole site, different types of assets, and then they actually do a lot of caching on their end as well. One thing I should mention is that New Relic, we use New Relic, and this is really important because they're an application monitoring system, but it's really critical for us to monitor the performance impact of queries. If the site feels slow or if there's something going on, you can quickly go in there and get a trace of a slow SQL statement, for example, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. Here was a SQL that was run. You're missing indexes here and here. It's really, really useful for an in-production system. Going along with that are scheduled jobs. Pardon me. So one of the things that you'll end up doing, especially in a marketplace, is building scheduled jobs. So like cron jobs or quartz jobs, depending on which technology you're using. But it's almost guaranteed you'll have to do this, that run at some frequency to clean up the various transactions that are happening between the two parties of the system. Some of those things happen immediately. Some of them happen later at a scheduled date. It could be having to do with bookkeeping, payments, things like that. One thing to always look out for is when those are doing writes. Reads are one thing, so you can read, and typically that data is being cached and so forth. But when a scheduled job has to do writes back in your database, that can be very expensive, and so you typically don't want to do that during prime time hours. You also want to optimize for that, and that's something to keep in mind. The last thing I would say is the other piece of our data stack is Elasticsearch. So another sort of NoSQL solution. This is for storing all of our not user-facing data, but effectively internal data, log data. And it's really useful when paired with Logstash for being able to do search and analytics on your own internal log data.
I thought we'd open it. Both Chris and I are available for questions. I know we both kind of went fast, but I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I'll turn it over to the moderator to help facilitate those. Yeah, so the question was about sitters and taxes, and every marketplace deals with this differently. In our case, the bookings and the payment are associated with the parent account, and so in I would say like 98% of cases on UrbanSitter, the parent does not hit the payment threshold with which they are responsible for filing taxes or requiring the sitter to file taxes. In the other 2% of cases, it's up to the parent to take the initiative because the parent is technically the person of record on our system. It's not UrbanSitter. Where this is different would be like somebody like an Airbnb where they charge you in April for a place that you're going to stay in July, and they sit on that money until July, and then in July the house is rented. So with Airbnb, they actually work directly with the homeowners to provide those 1099s. In our case, it's between the parent and the sitter. And each marketplace is kind of different, and part of it depends on how regulated the marketplace was previously and what the precedent has been set by other people in that space. Yep. Sure. So how did we get going in a market? Well, first of all, kind of like I mentioned, we actually will hone in on a specific part of that market. So let's say we were coming to where you were, we would say, where are most of the families located and where are the nearby universities? So for us, universities are a great place to recruit sitters. And then what we would do is we would hone in on organizations on campus and recruit people on the supply side through those organizations. So it might be reaching out to, like, let's say you have a nursing college. We'd go to the nursing college because a lot of parents like to hire nursing students as babysitters. On the flip side, on the parent side, we would find out what the top mom groups are in that area, and we would, through Facebook ads, we could also target women of a certain age that have college degrees that live in that area. And we know that if they're in a certain age range, they're more likely to have kids. And we would also go to some of these top groups and try to partner with them. So we'd kind of find like the out on the ground marketing advocates. So if I was going to move there tomorrow, you know, what mom in the area would be the person that would hook me up with like the right schools for my kids, the right sports programs, things like that. And those people usually very early on become our advocates, and we may even hire them to do some contract work for us to help us form the initial parent partnerships when we get there. Yeah, yep, you're good. That's a great question. I'm actually on Thursday. I'm presenting at the Stanford Graduate School of Business case studies on co-founders. My very first startup was focused. It was before Monster.com existed. It was a job board to help college students find jobs with different companies. And in that business and my second internet business, I partnered with people who had very similar skills to mine, which would be more finance and business focused, less technical or product. And in both cases, it kind of backfired on me long term. So this time around, I decided that I was going to take a different approach, and I was going to look for people who had similar vision but very different skills. So my co-founders this time have experience in product marketing and technology, so three of them, and I'm sort of the jack of all trades, I guess you could say. And so the thing I learned this time was bringing in people with different skills. And I'm a firm believer, if you're going to start a business, I highly recommend The Startup's Dilemma. It's a book by, I think his name is Noam Wasserman from Harvard, and it's all about like, what makes a successful startup, and it looks at like equity. So what sort of equity split do co-founders have? What types of co-founders are they? When does the company get financing? And I think it's just based on data from hundreds of thousands of startups, and it's pretty interesting to see what they recommend in terms of the types of co-founders that you bring in and what the equity split looks like. Well, I'm going to let Chris answer that, but I'm going to start before he answers it by telling you that Chris was recently hired in as our VP of engineering over somebody that had been here previously. So poor Chris is actually dealing with we have technical debt. So we'll talk about how Chris would start picking software. Maybe we'll give Chris the question of like, how would you pick software today if you were starting from scratch?
Yeah, great question. I guess the simplest way I would say is picking the right tool for the job. And that often comes down to what's the problem, what's the domain. So especially when it comes to databases and data stores in general, there's often the question nowadays of should I go with a RDBMS, a relational data store, traditional relational database, or SQL versus a non-SQL database, something that MongoDB or CouchDB or any of the other ones that are out there. And also there's the open source versus open source, and maybe Linux versus Microsoft. Those are some bigger decisions, and a lot of it comes down to you're always weighing the short term. I need to get to market because that's one of the most important things there is, especially startup, and especially the earlier you are, getting to market is really the key. But you want to weigh that against making sure you don't build too much technical debt that you can't pay off, or using a technology that just won't fit for you long term and will just fail at some point. That being said, typically you're either a Linux shop or you're a Microsoft shop. That's kind of the way it works. Most places, I've always worked in Linux shops, and that's most places are like that in general because of both the cost and the openness of that community. I won't go too deep into that, but the next thing is paid versus open. Your startup, you're going to go for the cheapest solution possible. Again, so that typically leans you towards open source, Linux-based solutions. Also, you don't want to do anything or build anything that's not your business. So, for example, it can be interesting to try to build a customized solution for certain pieces, but the reality is, if you are, let's say, a marketplace like we are, you should be building a marketplace and leveraging everything that's out there, and that includes the infrastructure and so forth. And so, I would definitely lean towards infrastructure as a service solutions like Amazon or or Google Cloud. Both are great. I've worked with both extensively. You could say, what about past? That's a good way to start. That kind of fits into that category of, makes it very easy to start really quickly. Long term, I've known a lot of people move away from system like Heroku because of scalability. Whereas if you see something like Google Cloud, Amazon, web service, you can probably get a similar simplicity start and scale. DigitalOcean is also out there. I think they may have a better future than some of the other players. But often you want to find a solution that requires less step of maintenance. The reality is, getting something up and running quickly is easy. Maintaining it over time is hard. So, for example, if you can get away with using, let's say, databases, a managed database like on Amazon it's called RDS, and on Google it's called Cloud SQL. You don't have to create a server, install a database, do all that. They do all that for you and they manage it. So it's taking one, IT problem management problem off your plate. That goes a long way towards technical decisions. What can we use that we don't have to manage and have to basically pay someone that's going to have to manage that. You're leveraging the economy of scale, someone like Google or Amazon, paying people and having all this hardware. And when it comes down to one of the bigger questions with data is relational versus non-relational. And I actually worked with a company over a decade ago that was a non-SQL sort of enterprise back before that was quite as commoditized. And I think that always comes down to the problem domain. So for me, I would say for transactional systems and things like marketplaces, I would generally stick towards a relational database and being able to use SQL. There are a huge amount of advantages to that. They do take a little more upfront effort because you have to create your schemas and so forth and deal with a little more of that, writing SQL, as opposed to using a system like MongoDB where you just kind of, just create data as you need it. And, but I've managed production MongoDB systems and other ones, and the lack of joins, the lack of things like that are actually really a challenge and relational integrity and all the things you get with a traditional relational database. So what I typically say is if you're storing mass amounts of read data, for example, log data or something that you might have analytics on, it's great to use a NoSQL system. That's really what they excel at. And you can make systems like Redshift now are great. There's all sorts of them out there. Elasticsearch, as I mentioned before, we're doing search. So for things like, search is a good example too, as opposed to something like storing mass amounts of data. Search, you might want to optimize by putting the things in search into something optimized for search, like Elasticsearch or Lucene. But your core transactional data is very write heavy, and you want to have a lot of consistency guarantees. You probably want a more traditional relational database that gives you the asset properties. So you start thinking about things like consistency is obviously a big one, especially with something like a marketplace, and there's it's very mission critical that things are consistent in terms of you do something, you pay for something, or you both something. So that's kind of how I would look at the selection process.
Yeah, good question. So this will kind of tie into raising money for companies too. So this company started with myself and my 3 co-founders, and we actually launched the business with just the 4 of us. And we started with one market. And what we decided to do was to launch the product and make sure that we had repeat use and got some growing user numbers before we went and got our first round of funding. So there were just 4 of us who launched the business. And then we grew it slowly. And then in the last year, we've actually doubled in size. We're up to about 50 people now. I'm a big believer in hiring to make sure you hit your growth numbers, but not over hiring. It's tricky at a startup, especially when you have venture financing, because you're under the to have accelerated growth, but at the same time, you actually have to make that bottom line number. And so you don't want to grow so much that your office, the people in your home office, you're carrying such heavy overhead that even if you're seeing growth, you aren't able to support your home office. So we've grown quickly, but I feel like we've grown fairly. I feel like everybody here does slightly more than one person's worth of job, which people here might say that that's too much. I think that's sort of a good measure of like, okay, we kind of really because people do a lot of work and I think it's proven our that we are. How do we be scalable? And I think it's a combination of the technology side. I would say what we found is we've actually certain more users are coming to us directly gaining credibility. There's able to scale new customers whenever expensive and making more pay. But then I also have to stop repeat users because you're going to spend a lot of returning the customers, new customers. So from the side between existing customers and getting a playbook that we rather than scratching every market we go into. So we go into that market we need to do and that market. Even though we want to try to it the business of it, we go into actually we get your kind of resources and scaling much.
Yeah, I would say solution and complex. And so there's always good to focus on. So they might seem more built in modular, um, and that a lot of people that they don't want to go onto it. Simple and just focus on that. Everything is you have to just pursuing where deployment all the more if you early on that you can and the DevOps nowadays that if you don't do it yourself doing a whole it's you're doing a lot of stuff. And this is one area because you know just go in vertical you're scaling it's about problem
We actually take things that when we new features or things in our product remove because not as and we're actually increasing the test and so good question. Let me actually for a couple of parents. So subscription for parents and also that gives them some additional money and background checks. For the most part, it's paying us.
maybe solve the problem, being a taxi, free, right, last mile. I think to explore the novel knowledge there. Even look at drone things, a lot of down to and you know and there is a lot of ways maybe postal industries or even that's where there's a lot of these the value